Afflicted with a disease slowly consuming his body, the only escape from his harsh reality was a strategy game he played obsessively day and night, right until his final moments. Yet death wasn't the end. He awoke within the very game he loved, completely powerless, lacking status or abilities. Now trapped in this world he once fled to for comfort, he must fight to survive, build strength from nothing, and rise to conquer the world that's become his new reality. The story centers around a young man named Takuto, who spent most of his time absorbed in a strategy game called Eternal Nations. Confined to a hospital bed, Takuto found solace and meaning only in playing Eternal Nations, and eventually died with the game still running. But his death wasn't final. Moments later, he opens his eyes, finding himself sitting on a throne amid ancient ruins in a forest. His first thought is about how incredibly fresh and real the air feels. Suddenly, a woman approaches him, gently asking if he's finally awake. When she reveals her face, Takuto instantly recognizes her as Atu, an elven character from Eternal Nations. Atu respectfully calls him Your Majesty, leaving Takuto utterly confused, wondering what on earth is happening. As an experienced anime fan, he quickly figures out he must have somehow been transported into the world of Eternal Nations, the very game world he spent countless hours in. But this realization brings more questions. Typically, Atu would only address her king this way if he were the Lord of Mynoghra, the nation Takuto previously led in the game. Atu speaks again, this time calling him Takuto-sama, and explains further. She mentions Takuto is the first ever player to conquer Nightmare difficulty using Mynoghra, widely known as the toughest civilization in the game. She proudly reveals that Takuto is listed on the game's global leaderboards, giving him legendary status. Takuto's confusion deepens even further. How can a mere game character know about things beyond her own game world reality? And Atu gently explains that she remembers everything, every victory, every defeat, each word Takuto ever spoke to her through his screen, and the entire journey they shared together until now. Hearing this, Takuto is overcome with emotion, tears forming in his eyes. He tells Atu how happy he is to finally speak to her directly, confessing she was always his favorite character in Eternal Nations. Atu warmly replies that she feels precisely the same way. Still, none of this clarifies how he ended up here, so Takuto looks at Atu directly and asks if it was she who brought him into this world. Atu honestly admits she has no clue how they got here, as she herself only arrived a few minutes ago. Still, she's certain of one thing. The place they're in feels exactly like the world of Eternal Nations. Regardless of their location, Atu is deeply grateful she's finally met her true king in person. Holding Takuto's hands gently, she urges him to begin their journey anew together. Atu shares her dream of rebuilding an empire with just the two of them, and since Takuto has nothing else left, he gladly agrees to join her quest. When Takuto extends his hand to formally shake on their partnership, Atu suddenly switches to her NPC persona, introducing herself dramatically as Sludge Atu, an illegitimate child born of a fallen world. She solemnly pledges her entire being, mind, soul, and body entirely to Takuto. Though Atu's character is technically evil, the theatrics feel painfully cliché, leaving both her and Takuto momentarily embarrassed. Still, Takuto decides to lean into it, dramatically declaring that alongside Atu, his trusted right hand, he'll establish Mynoghra, the most sinister empire of them all. Takuto then turns to Atu, asking if she remembers what Mynoghra must always do first. Proudly, Atu states they should hide themselves away completely, staying unseen like true recluses to avoid discovery. Taking action immediately, Takuto summons an emergency production scout, a strange insect-like creature with extremely long legs. Given Mynoghra's alignment with evil and destruction, all their units naturally look horrifying, including this scout. Regardless, Takuto issues commands, instructing it to thoroughly investigate their surroundings, and Atu sternly reminds it that disappointing their king isn't an option. And obediently, the scout departs on its assigned task. Takuto then reveals to Atu that he can actually see through the scout's eyes, confirming to both of them that the world indeed works just like the game. He briefly explains to Atu how summoning works here. His current total magic power is at 200 MP, and creating the scout consumed 100 MP. Takuto carefully considers his options for spending his remaining magic points. Building a base would cost only 20 MP, but he also wonders if he should prioritize defense by summoning a warrior. Unfortunately, doing so would consume more power than he currently possesses. In Eternal Nations, Atu is classified as a hero character, making her particularly powerful in combat. But since their new journey has barely begun, Atu's current strength level remains only at level 3, which is quite low. Anyway, thanks to the scout's reconnaissance, Takuto gains a clear picture of their surroundings, which primarily consists of endless forests. So this setting proves an ideal location for establishing Mynoghra's base, though Atu finds it unsettling that there's absolutely no wildlife or available food nearby. Realizing it would be too dangerous to relocate, Takuto instructs the scout to extend its search and explore an even wider perimeter. Atu then begins feeling downhearted, believing she's not contributing enough to assist her king. Seeing her discouraged expression, Takuto gently reassures her, saying that simply having her by his side is more than enough. Deeply touched by his sincere words, Atu instantly becomes even more devoted to him. Meanwhile, their scout soon discovers a campsite inhabited by a group of dark elves. Takuto hesitates, unsure what their next move should be because accidentally encroaching on another group's territory could cause serious problems, so he figures it's best for them to lay low for now. Atu suggests optimistically that if things do take a turn for the worse, they can simply escape together. Her encouragement boosts Takuto's confidence, so they decide to quietly observe the dark elves from a safe distance and find out what they're doing here. But suddenly, 3 dark elves stumble directly into them, catching both Takuto and Atu off guard. Takuto freezes in surprise, realizing the dark elves he planned to carefully avoid. Those same elves he was prepared to flee from if they ever crossed paths are now standing right in front of them. Both he and Atu remain unsure about how the encounter will turn out, but recognizing the importance of staying calm in situations like this, they manage to maintain their composure. At the same time, the dark elves have no intention of harming anyone. They explain that they've recently been driven from the city they once called home and have desperately led their people into the forest to seek safety. And after a difficult journey, they've managed to set up a temporary shelter in this cursed land. However, with no food available, they're in a desperate situation, knowing their children will starve without supplies. Captain Nagi, leader of the Dark Elves, is currently exploring this bleak forest alongside his soldiers, increasingly worried their journey might have been completely futile since the area seems utterly lifeless. Several of Nagi's men start complaining bitterly, arguing it might have been better if they just stayed and died back in the city, rather than starving out here. They recall grim stories about the forest being cursed by a mysterious man, a place where neither life nor love can ever flourish. Nagi quickly warns them against losing hope, reminding his people that if they falter now, their children waiting anxiously back at camp won't have any chance at all. He firmly reminds them their kids still have faith in them, and that turning back empty-handed simply isn't an option. Still, as Nagi continues forward, he can't help but reflect on his soldiers' grim words. Deep down, he knows they're not wrong. The chances of survival here seem impossibly slim. But as their leader, he can't afford to show fear or give up because his people depend on him to guide them safely through this crisis. Walking deeper into the woods, Nagi suddenly senses the presence of Takuto and Atu. A wave of dread rushes through him, afraid that these unknown entities might attack without mercy and wipe out his entire team. Whatever choice he makes next could determine the fate of his people, so Nagi steels himself, deciding to approach diplomatically. When Nagi finally reaches them, he's taken aback by Takuto's shadowy, spirit-like appearance, though Atu seems relatively normal. Without hesitation, Nagi immediately drops to his knees, prompting his followers to do the same. Then, with a voice full of humility, he apologizes for entering their territory uninvited. Atu, glaring coldly at Nagi, sharply questions him, demanding to know why he would trespass despite knowing it was forbidden. Nagi nervously explains their desperate circumstances, how their people were banished without warning, forced to flee their city without supplies, the exhausting journey, and the starving children still waiting anxiously in the forest. Feeling increasingly anxious under Atu's harsh gaze, Nagi braces himself, convinced they're about to execute him. However, Takuto surprises him by calmly asking if he's hungry. Nagi hesitates nervously, uncertain how to respond, until Atu firmly instructs him to answer her master's question. Quietly, Nagi admits he is hungry, and immediately, Takuto conjures several apples out of thin air. Nagi stares in bewilderment, never having seen an apple before, unsure if they're even edible. Takuto kindly assures him that the fruit is juicy and delicious, encouraging him to try it. Still hesitant, Nagi looks behind him, shocked to see his men already devouring the apples eagerly. Atu then firmly urges him to eat as well, yet Nagi still feels uneasy. Noticing his hesitation, Takuto promptly conjures pears as well. Now Nagi is openly suspicious, deeply confused by Takuto's generosity. The Dark Elves had always been viewed with hostility, constantly rejected by others. To suddenly encounter someone willing to help without any hidden motive felt disturbingly unnatural. Nagi finally states he'd rather bring the food back to feed the starving children in their camp. But before he can even finish his sentence, Takuto conjures even more fruit for him. Overwhelmed, Nagi can only feel gratitude and disbelief. Meanwhile, back at the camp, The Dark Elf children lie weak and exhausted, silently praying for rescue. Suddenly, they catch a familiar scent in the air. Their prayers are answered because Nagi and his soldiers have returned, bringing with them more food than they've ever seen. Nagi joyfully tells everyone to prepare for a feast, and soon they're all eagerly eating, and the starving children quickly regain their strength. One of the elves then curiously asks Nagi where he got all the food, but Nagi avoids giving details. Instead, he simply tells them fate finally smiled upon them. Yet deep in his heart, he remains haunted by the memory of the mysterious, intimidating figure he encountered in the forest. After the meal, everyone falls into a peaceful sleep, except for Nagi, who remains awake, staring thoughtfully into the fire. As he stands watch, Elder Moltar approaches quietly, gently pulling Nagi out of his deep contemplation. Moltar expresses gratitude for Nagi's efforts, but mentions that the fruit tasted unlike anything he's ever known, even after living 200 years. Nagi nods, agreeing that the fruit definitely tasted strange. Moltar presses him about where the food came from, prompting Nagi to confess they encountered a legendary figure after wandering deep into the cursed forest. Hearing this, Moltar wonders aloud if it was perhaps the King of Ruin, recalling ancient stories about a mythical being said to appear when the world becomes too crowded, destroying everything and returning civilization to darkness. But no one knows if those legends hold any truth, since nobody's ever witnessed it personally. Moltar asks Nagi directly if the mysterious figure introduced himself as the King of Ruin. Nagi admits Takuto never actually introduced himself at all. He only spoke through a servant. Moltar insists there's no way a dark entity like that would offer assistance for free, demanding to know what Nagi promised in exchange. Nagi, however, insists it was purely an act of generosity from Takuto, nothing else. Moltar remains skeptical, arguing no evil being ever offers help without hidden motives. Nagi firmly calls Takuto the Great One, determined to defend him and emphasizing that he simply chose to help. Moltar counters that such a noble title doesn't suit the rumored King of Ruin, but Nagi refuses to budge. He argues passionately that Takuto deserves the respect because he helped them in their time of need, and frustratingly wonders if it might have been better if they'd all died rather than receive such aid. Hearing this, Moltar reluctantly concedes Nagi's point, agreeing to handle negotiations personally when the time comes to repay their mysterious benefactor. Nagi gazes over at his sleeping people, silently questioning when they might finally rest without fear. At the same time, Atu is thoroughly upset with Takuto for wasting valuable mana by feeding total strangers. She sternly forces him onto his knees as he tries to explain he simply felt sorry for them. Atu can't believe his recklessness, reminding him sharply they don't yet know whether Mynoghra will be peaceful or brutal or how many battles might lie ahead, so wasting mana like that could be dangerous. Realizing she might have gone too far scolding her own king, Atu quickly apologizes, but Takuto gently reassures her, reminding her they're partners and that he couldn't survive in this place without her by his side. He also admits feeling awkward around the Dark Elves, suggesting perhaps he's shy. Atu is surprised. She'd assumed Takuto was deliberately playing the role of a dignified king, communicating solely through her as his servant. The two laugh and tease each other playfully for a moment, until Takuto's summoned scout finally returns. The next morning, Nagi readies himself for another trip to see Takuto, prompting Elder Moltar to question if he is truly ready to see the Dark King. Moltar is convinced that since they'd already chosen to rely on the Dark King's help, they must be ready to meet whatever demands he eventually makes. Nagi disagrees, pointing out that Takuto has never mentioned wanting anything in return, but Moltar insists that creatures of darkness always expect compensation for their favors. Still, Moltar reluctantly admits that for now, they have no choice but to trust Takuto, since there's nowhere else left to go. So they decide to visit Takuto together, completely unaware that his insect scout had been observing their entire conversation. Takuto quickly calls back the scout to report to him, and upon hearing that the elves are on their way, he quietly hopes they'll just pick up the remaining food he had prepared yesterday and leave without causing a fuss. Anxiety quickly starts to grip Takuto as he explains to Atu that he's terrible with conversations, and doesn't know if he'll be able to negotiate properly with the Dark Elves. Atu reassures him she'll handle it herself, adding that this will also show the Dark Elves that her king wouldn't stoop low enough to speak with them personally. Shortly after, Moltar and Nagi arrive, and the Elder Moltar greets Takuto with an overly formal and eloquent salutation, almost like something straight out of cover letter, thanking him for the generous provision he offered his folk. Moltar then respectfully asks permission to know the identity of their Dark King. After receiving permission from Takuto, Atu reveals his name proudly, declaring him to be the feared Dark King of Ruin himself. Both of the Dark Elves become visibly shaken upon having their worst fears confirmed. Atu then coldly instructs them to simply take the food and leave, because it's not going to last much longer anyway. Yet Molter politely insists on repaying Takudo for his generosity and asks what they can possibly give him in return. Atu coldly informs him that there's nothing in their possession capable of pleasing her king, so attempting repayment would be pointless. She then questions if the elves even have anything left that they consider valuable at all, causing Moltar to hesitate as he realizes they genuinely have nothing worthwhile to give. Noticing his hesitation, Atu immediately gives him a cold, intimidating stare and suspiciously asks him if he's secretly planning something. Moltar becomes visibly flustered, and Takudo quickly realizes their conversation is going downhill fast, so he immediately signals Atu over to quietly discuss how they should proceed. But Atu becomes frustrated because she thinks Takudo is being way too soft on these two hopeless elves, and she insists these guys have zero clue how to handle negotiations, and if this continues, they'll just turn into an annoying headache later on. So she dramatically suggests killing them both and displaying their heads around the base as a clear warning, but Takudo quickly tells her to stop acting like a psycho. He calmly explains that the elves genuinely seem to want peaceful coexistence and sincerely wish to repay their kindness. Instead of just handing out freebies, he suggests they ask for something small in return, keeping their relations with the elves positive. Atu reluctantly agrees and then tells the elves that her king has generously decided to accept their offer of repayment. Seeing Molter suddenly relax makes Takudo and Atu both realize he was freaking out earlier because he had totally assumed Takudo would act like a typical villain. Atu scolds Moltar for misjudging her king so harshly, but then she pauses, realizing she doesn't actually know what to ask them for. Thankfully, Takudo quickly comes up with a great idea and suggests that they ask the elves to provide them with information about the world outside this forest. Molter immediately lights up with relief, promising eagerly that he'll share every bit of knowledge he's gained about the outside world. Atu nods but adds sternly that once Moltar has provided the information, he and his tribe must leave the forest immediately. This shocks Nagi and Molter deeply, and they quickly plead to be allowed to continue living there under Takudo's protection, but Atu snaps at them to quit pushing their luck if they value their lives. Nagi tries to argue further, but Molter quickly silences him, admitting they must respect the king's wishes. They begin turning to leave, but watching them, Takudo suddenly feels a pang of guilt for kicking them out like this. He abruptly changes his mind, telling Moltar and Nagi that instead of leaving, they can become citizens of his kingdom. Both elves freeze up completely, stunned by this unexpected kindness, though no one is more shocked than Atu, who can't believe what she's hearing. She immediately questions Takudo's logic, asking what the hell he's thinking. He calmly reminds her about the refugee system from the game, allowing different races to peacefully join their nation. And since dark elves are neutral aligned, he points out they'll easily blend in with their kingdom's evil attribute, making coexistence entirely possible. Atu still isn't totally convinced because evil-aligned species usually end up causing drama among themselves, but Takudo gently refreshes her memory that their main citizens, named homunculi, literally look like humans who got shredded and put back together by a 5-year-old, and there's no way they're going to be hanging out with those creepy things all day. The horrifying image of the homunculi immediately pops into Atu's mind, instantly changing her mind. She quickly agrees and turns to Moltar and Nagi, declaring that Takudo plans to build a full-fledged kingdom soon and is generously offering them citizenship if they're willing to swear loyalty. Moltar hesitates, asking what exactly it means to become their citizens, and Atu bluntly answers that they'd basically become evil-aligned beings. Still, she assures them with a sly smile that being evil isn't nearly as bad as it sounds. It's actually a lot more fun. Not long after, Takudo and Atu visit the Dark Elves settlement, where everyone anxiously awaits their arrival. They're so terrified that some of the weaker elves pass out at just the sight of Takudo. Calmly, Takudo takes his place on the throne with Atu at his side, who announces clearly to everyone gathered that from now on, they officially belong to their new kingdom Mynoghra. She then asks Takudo if he's certain, and with a confident he says yeah, and then confirms that on his screen, and just like that the Dark Elves are officially citizens of Mynoghra. Atu congratulates them, emphasizing that from now onward, their safety and survival are personally guaranteed by their new king. Nagi wonders out loud if that's really it, because he doesn't actually feel any different, despite supposedly becoming an evil being. Almost immediately, he regrets speaking too soon when a wave of overwhelming hatred suddenly floods through him and the rest of the elves. Painful memories of being persecuted and attacked surge in their minds, filling them with an intense desire for revenge. Seeing everyone suddenly suffering, Takudo softly asks if they're alright, and hearing his genuine concern, Nagi becomes emotional, deeply moved by the realization that someone finally cares about them. With tears streaming down their faces, the Dark Elves start passionately cheering for Takudo, leaving him a little overwhelmed but deeply touched by their enthusiasm. After a few days, Moltar presents a map of the continent to Takudo, who immediately collapses in disbelief. Atu asks what's troubling him, and he simply gestures towards the map, saying their starting location couldn't be any freaking worse. They're stuck on a continent shared by two damn gigantic, powerful civilizations. On one side is the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a massive human nation worshipping Arlos, the creator and known for being annoyingly righteous and strictly good aligned. On the opposite side lies Elna, the Elemental Alliance, a nation of elves devoted to nature. They're equally on the side of good, making Atu realize they're literally sandwiched between two huge civilizations that would wipe them out in an instant if discovered. Panicking, Atu falls beside Takudo in despair, but Takudo quickly regains composure, reminding her that as long as they keep a low profile, they can quietly grow stronger. He recalls that their main race, the homunculi, were dumb as rocks in the game and terrible at research. Luckily, now that they've got Dark Elves on their side, things should go much smoother. Soon after, the Dark Elves arrive for a meeting, this time bringing along Emil, Nagi's assistant. Nagi introduces her as a nerdy genius who knows way more than him about foreign kingdoms, and insists she'll definitely prove useful. Atu conveys to the elves that their dedication has pleased the king, and she announces they're all about to receive major responsibilities, directly ordered by Takudo himself. First up, Moltar is tasked with managing internal affairs. Atu said she expects big things from him, especially since she learned he knows magic too. Next, she appoints Nagi as the head of Mynoghra's warriors, charging him with building a powerful military for defense. When she leaves recruitment up to him, Nagi gets way too excited, shouting dramatically that he'll destroy all their enemies and proudly mount their heads as trophies. But Takudo's already feeling queasy at the gruesome imagery. He quietly remarks that war is barbaric, and Atu clarifies for the confused Nagi that their king actually prefers peace, so he needs to chill out with the killing talk. This just confuses Nagi even more, who wonders what kind of dark king of ruin is into peace. Moltar, seeing Nagi's confusion, sarcastically teases him and confidently states that, unlike Nagi who clearly has more muscles than brains, he himself will prove far more useful to Takudo. Nagi immediately takes it as a challenge, boasting loudly to Takudo that he's young and full of energy, ready to tirelessly serve the king without rest. Atu completely misunderstands their little competition as genuine dedication, mistaking them for workaholics instead of two idiots desperate for Big Evil Daddy's approval. She turns to Takudo, asking if they should send them on a resource collecting mission, but Takudo suggests a better idea, beautifying the land and building proper homes. Atu immediately relays this to Moltar, instructing him to gather timber for building, but to make sure he doesn't ruin the beauty of the forest. Moltar eagerly agrees, boasting that Dark Elves were originally forest dwellers anyway, so he'll handle it perfectly. Takudo then adds that they should reforest the areas they clear, causing confusion among the elves who've never even heard the term before. Realizing this world might be more primitive than expected, Takudo cautiously asks if they're familiar with military magic or the 6 major elements. Moltar replies that he's only heard of 4 major elements, while Emil admits she's never even seen military magic being used by any kingdom. Takudo and Atu exchange looks, realizing they've hit a jackpot. This world is even less advanced than they thought, giving them a huge advantage to leap ahead quickly once they implement advanced magical technology. Atu patiently explains that reforesting means rapidly regrowing new trees to replace ones they'd cut down, using magic. The elves mention they do regrow trees naturally, but admit they never considered using magic to speed things up. Atu describes how reforesting employs the 6 major elements to rapidly grow new trees, then promptly credits this discovery to Takudo, even though it's a total lie. She starts glazing Takudo shamelessly, bragging about how he even created those special fruits the elves ate earlier, especially mentioning that grapes are her personal favorite. Emil excitedly confirms Atu's words, then says that she also planted some grape seeds, and they've actually started sprouting. Takudo himself is stunned by this revelation, not expecting earth-based fruits to grow so easily here. Suddenly inspired, he quickly tests his theory by magically creating a coin from earth. When it works, he's thrilled to realize he could potentially introduce advanced technologies like gunpowder, drastically accelerating the growth and superiority of his civilization compared to others. Elsewhere in the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, the situation was starting to escalate as well. Saint Solina led a unit of knights across the snowy foothills, fully committed to eliminating the dangerous beasts terrorizing nearby townlets. The moment a pack of goblins rushed into view, Solina calmly raised her staff, incinerating them instantly with her sacred fire. The holy blaze dissipated into the sky after obliterating the monsters, and gentle sunlight poured down onto the charred earth, prompting flowers to bloom in their place. Turning to his astonished knights, their captain proudly announced that Solina's divine power purged monsters of evil alignment, leaving behind blossoming flower fields and it was her ability alone that had allowed them to maintain such strong diplomatic ties with the elves. Following the brief skirmish, Solina confronted the cardinal, urging him to send paladins southward, warning that she'd recently sensed an ominous disturbance within the cursed forest. But the cardinal flatly refused, claiming the cursed forest sat at the far edge of the continent, and deploying paladins there would require special authorization from those above him. Unfazed, Solina firmly warned him that she would personally handle the matter if no troops were sent. Initially, the cardinal tried pushing back, but quickly caved under her icy glare, promising instead to send whatever limited forces he could personally command. Meanwhile, back in their own domain, Takudo and Atu were focused on developing their newfound territory, beginning by constructing decent homes for the Dark Elves. They'd already thrown together a makeshift throne room around Takudo's throne, and he was thrilled by the idea of finally hosting important meetings with the prominent members of his kingdom. Right then, Moltar, Nagi, and Emil entered, ready for action. Atu informed them that it was about damn time to kick off their first official council meeting. But before the meeting could start, Emil eagerly approached Takudo, revealing a gift, an elegant new outfit that, to his mild embarrassment, was dangerously close to femboy territory. Still, Takudo gratefully accepted the new clothes, admitting his old garments were getting embarrassingly filthy, and thanked the elves sincerely. Oddly enough, the elves couldn't see any visible change in his appearance, but they decided to trust Atu's enthusiastic praise about how perfectly the outfit suited their beloved leader. With the clothing crisis resolved, Atu briskly began the council meeting, only to realize Takudo was still hopelessly lost in admiring himself. Slightly annoyed but unsurprised, she chose to carry on the meeting herself, casually suggesting she consult Takudo whenever his actual input was needed, and Takudo happily agreed to her suggestion, fully content to keep silently fawning over his own fabulousness. As the meeting begins, Moltar immediately asks Atu about the type of buildings they ought to prioritize, so Atu confidently suggests they start with food production facilities and promptly reveals a disturbingly grotesque plant, announcing that it will serve as their primary food source for now. The elves visibly cringed, barely able to hide their disgust, before hesitantly asking Atu what the hell that horrific thing was supposed to be. With unsettling enthusiasm, she informed them it was called the flesh plant, a unique delicacy of their civilization. According to Atu, it produced meat that tasted disturbingly similar to human flesh, but was incredibly nutritious. Horrified by this revelation, the elves quickly clarified they weren't exactly into eating people. Atu assured them the flesh plant was just a temporary solution for their food shortage, and soon enough they'd have far less disturbing options available. After that unsettling announcement, she explained they'd also need storage units and administrative buildings near the farms, so Emil promptly volunteered to oversee those structures. Next, Atu shifted gears to the next crucial topic on the agenda: research. She emphasized that obtaining cutting-edge tech was absolutely critical for a fledgling nation like theirs. Moltar, intrigued, asked her specifically what sort of technology they should focus on, and Atu excitedly revealed their target would be magical tech. Takudo practically lit up with excitement upon hearing that, and Moltar eagerly declared that as a skilled mage, he put in his best effort to impress their king. He followed up, asking precisely what kind of magical tech they should aim for, and Atu enthusiastically revealed they'd dive straight into military magic research. She explained that standard attack spells were pitifully limited, barely managing to handle a handful of enemies, while advanced military-grade magic could annihilate entire cities or even reshape terrain to their advantage. Moltar, now fired up, immediately agreed to round up all magically gifted elves and begin working on groundbreaking magical spells that hadn't even appeared yet in their world. Then Atu moved on to the final topic of the meeting: their military strategy. Nagi perked up instantly, excited that it was finally his turn to shine, but Takudo quickly burst his bubble by bluntly stating they wouldn't heavily invest in their military right now. Atu backed him up, pointing out armies cost a shitload to maintain but produced nothing useful during peaceful periods. Nagi protested strongly, arguing they lacked sufficient power to properly defend their king, and thus should definitely prioritize their military. Moltar also joined in, reminding them that both he and Nagi had massive bounties placed on their heads as Dark Elf leaders, meaning their kingdom might soon become a juicy target for enemies. Understanding their concerns, Takudo quickly came up with a smarter alternative: creating a hero to defend the kingdom. Atu immediately agreed, admitting heroes were expensive upfront but required zero upkeep, making them the perfect choice given their current situation. The elves stared blankly, clearly having zero clue what the hell a hero was even supposed to be. Atu quickly clarified that heroes were ridiculously powerful beings who served directly under the king. She explained that each hero had certain conditions that needed to be met before summoning them, but she confidently reassured them they'd be able to summon their first hero fairly soon. Takudo, pumped as ever, was already hyped up at the idea. He remembered that nearly everything in this world required mana, and a kingdom could only gather that mana directly from its own people. The happier the citizens were, the more mana they'd produce, and Takuto made a silent vow right there. He turned this kingdom into the happiest damn place on the entire planet. At the same time, far away in the holy kingdom of Qualia, a junior paladin named Lornias had just gotten the dubious honor of being selected for an investigation team heading straight into the notorious Cursed Forest. Accompanying him was a veteran paladin named Wordle, whose favorite pastime was clearly making Lornias's life a living hell with his constant teasing. Wordle immediately started bitching about the tiny size of their investigation unit, consisting of only 2 paladins and a handful of mercenaries. He grumbled loudly about how the church should seriously start taking Saint Solina's prophecies more seriously. Lornias cautiously agreed, though he was painfully aware nobody could predict what the higher-ups had planned. One thing he did know, though, was that if they managed to pull off this investigation, they'd receive huge rewards, but if things went south, his head would definitely be the first on the chopping block. Back in Mynoghra, Takuto strolled through the developing kingdom, inspecting the early stages of his civilization with a deep sense of nostalgia. It was a scene he'd witnessed thousands of times before, but always through a screen, never in person. This time, he was right in the thick of things. Emil eagerly gave him a detailed tour, proudly explaining that dark elves excelled at constructing tree houses, although right now the housing project was crawling along since the elves had prioritized cultivating the flesh trees. Fortunately, the grotesque flesh trees seemed to be thriving nicely, and they'd already managed to build storage and administrative facilities. Emil also mentioned that they discovered a freshwater spring close by and were now trying to find ways to draw water from it. Meanwhile, Moltar and a bunch of other mages had been grinding hard on their magic research in a recently completed lab. Hearing all this progress made Takuto feel genuinely relieved, but he was particularly delighted to hear that the elves were proactively handling things like seeking out water sources on their own. Seeing the elves, who had looked utterly drained when it first arrived, now smiling happily was a huge relief. When Takuto shared his joy with Emil, she suddenly burst into tears of happiness, completely startling him. Takuto panicked momentarily at the unexpected meltdown, but thankfully Emil quickly regained her composure and continued the tour as if nothing had happened. Next, Emil guided Takuto and Atu toward the flesh tree farm. With noticeable excitement, she explained that, thanks to the tools Takuto had generously provided, they'd soon be able to enjoy their very first harvest. After that, Emil guided them toward the freshwater spring the elves had discovered earlier, but immediately noticed the vibe was totally different this time around. Instead of clear, sparkling water, it had turned murky and dark, leaving Emil visibly crushed, assuming it had become unusable. Before Atu could even explain why that wasn't the case, Moltar and Nagi also arrived to check out the water. Both of them quickly agreed with Emil, believing the spring had been ruined, but Atu just casually scooped up some of the gloomy-looking liquid and took a long sip, assuring everyone that it was perfectly safe. Atu then clarified that the spring only looked creepy and unsettling because it had officially become part of Mynoghra, all thanks to a neat little feature known as cursed terrain. Takuto chimed in, gently telling the elves to take a deep breath. As soon as they inhaled the gloomy air, they were instantly energized, their minds clearer and their bodies revitalized. Atu happily explained that cursed terrain grants bonuses to any creatures aligned with evil, while severely messing up anyone with neutral or good alignment. Since the Dark Elves were now officially part of Mynoghra, and therefore had evil alignment, the water posed no threat whatsoever. Natty cautiously took a sip himself, confirming her words. Atu added that soon enough, the entire forest would transform into this sinister-looking cursed terrain. Regardless, Takuto immediately started worrying aloud, pointing out that cursed terrain stuck out like a sore thumb. Moltar nodded gravely, agreeing that once the entire forest turned this ominous shade of creepy, they'd become easy targets for their enemies. Naturally, Natty jumped at the chance to once again insist they desperately needed an army, but both Takuto and Atu reassured him again that their solution was to summon a hero. Moltar, still clueless about what exactly a hero was, pressed for more explanation. Atu decided that a hands-on demonstration would be far more effective than another lecture. Without warning, Atu released a bunch of pitch-black tentacles from her back, effortlessly slicing through the nearby trees like they were toothpicks, before revealing smugly that she herself was a hero. She casually mentioned that she only had about 1% of her full power available, yet she could still obliterate entire armies on her own. Takuto eagerly hyped heroes up even more to the stunned elves, bragging that heroes were truly badass, continuously growing stronger with no effort at all. Realizing he'd gotten a bit carried away, he quickly shifted the conversation and scolded Atu lightly, telling her that showing off didn't require chopping down innocent trees and insisting she clean up the mess afterward. The elves, however, were beyond impressed. They immediately declared Takuto an amazing ruler for having subordinates powerful enough to cause such casual devastation. Fired up, they decided that they absolutely had to construct a magnificent palace worthy of such a king. Takuto awkwardly protested that he didn't really need anything grand right now, but the elves refused to budge, insisting there was no way in hell they'd let their esteemed king live in ordinary homes like theirs. Atu sided with the elves, pointing out that constructing a palace would boost everyone's morale. Unable to argue with that logic, Takuto relented, admitting that while his real dream was a badass flying fortress someday, he'd settle for a regular palace for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap and are excited for the next episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our daily recaps.